Welcome to another edition of Living with Purpose. Today I have James Williams, who has a very interesting background with having worked in the corporate sector and especially in sports, and has really worked hard with companies in the sports sector, trying to get them to show up with purpose in how they manage their products and how they understand the sports world. So I am really looking forward to having a conversation with James. I mean, sports is, we all enjoy sports, we all go to sports, we all, have a great affinity with a group that continues to bring about joy in how we associated with our sports teams, and the people that work behind the scenes, how do they actually weave purpose into this? So I'm looking forward to this conversation. James, welcome to Living with Purpose.
Great to be here, Akhtar. I'm looking forward to this.
So talk a little bit about your journey growing up. Where did you grow up? The family life. What were some seminal moments that helped, that molded you as a young person? And then we'll kind of take it from there.
I was born in the south coast of the UK, so in a little place called Rustington. Nice family, so two older brothers, and I was generally a lot shaped by two very successful and high achieving brothers. My father was a hairdresser, my mum was a school teacher who worked very hard, really hard workers, very diligent in what they did. And I think at one of the early stages in my life, I was told that I had a learning difficulty, which turned out to be dyslexia. And I think when you're told when you're 12 that you have a learning difficulty, it really
Mm.
impacts your education, because it really started to kind of be clear as to why I wasn't very good at, I guess, the normal curriculum and the ways the things are done in that way in terms of learning and growing. And I think being in an environment that was kind of hypercritical with two very successful older brothers, and always being that one that probably wasn't as successful, I really needed to find my kind of niche into what I was doing. And I think that's such a big thing with dyslexia, is to how do you find what you're good at in a world that at that stage just didn't really make space for it. That for me was probably all the way up through doing exams, my GCSEs, my A levels, which I struggled through. It wasn't easy. And then kind of tried to go to university, didn't really do my first year too well. So I went home, did some traveling. I really started to find my kind of niche, got involved in setting up my own business, and then realized that I needed to go back to university and choose a degree, which ended up being business administration, but majoring in marketing. That was where that was my sweet spot, where I really, the people side of it, the innovation side of it, the creative side of what I was doing was what I loved, and really kind of making a difference in these kind of businesses. So I think that was the first chapter of my life before I started working.
It's fascinating, right? I mean, everybody has different skill sets in how we learn. Most people kind of look at my resume and look at my bio and look at my journey, and they think that I would have been one of these superlative students. And I never was. I barely got through my school till I found architecture as a home. And then that changed in the way I started showing up. And when I was growing up, I have a very famous uncle who said that, you don't know how to speak. You got to go learn how to speak. And now I give thousands of talks, right? And I talk to people all the time. So it's just these different opportunities. So what you're saying just completely resonates. So when you talk about your successful brothers, just share a little bit about what was success for you at that time, 12, 13, 14-year-old, that actually shaped how you wanted to show up.
So interestingly, the successes were hard to find. So
Yeah,
it was more about the failures than it probably was about the successes for me in those early years. So,
right.
my brothers, they had brilliant O levels and A level results. They both went to Bath University. Both went straight into great jobs in the city. They are brilliant, and they're smart, and they're really good. And I was just never there. I was just
Right.
not going to be that guy. So for
Right.
me, I was always in the bottom set. I was never that, never had that.
Right.
For me, it was more about the failures or the realizing that you're not always going to do good. The probably then when I went into working life, similar with you, when you found your kind of your calling or whatever you want to call it into marketing, which is what I think I kind of that was the first part of my career, very much focused on that. Is where I could see the successes because that's where I could make a difference. That was where I could get people to collaborate. That was where I could be creative. That's where I could work in a team and work with other people's skills. And actually, when I went to do my degree in the end and went back to do business administration, it was a different setup. So therefore, you were working in teams, you were doing projects. So
Right.
fitted with me. So that was probably what fueled the kind of further success of my career because actually it was like if you keep working at something and keep working at something, eventually you'll find the thing that you like and you're good at.
The other thing that you shared, which I actually talk a lot about in my book and my work, is finding your strength.
Yeah.
There's one way we get to focus is overcome your weakness. But the flip side of that is figuring out your strength.
Yeah.
There are certain weaknesses you're never going to be able to overcome,
Yeah.
right? From that weakness perspective. But if you find your strength, that then just complements everything that you're doing.
Yeah.
Because part of the challenge is that we kind of frame ourselves as failures and successes versus actually saying, this is who I am and this is how I show up and this is what I contribute. So talk a little bit about, so you started this company, you came out of, you didn't want to go to school, you started a company, went back to school to get a degree in marketing and MBA, your BA, Business Administration. So talk about what happens next. How do you get to where you are?
So then I kind of break it down into chapters, and I was kind of my what's called agency life. So I moved up to London. I applied to a lot of marketing agencies, found a very small agency that was kind of like in its early stages, and joined them. And I ended up spending 9 years of my career there. And that was the one that taught me all those elements, the basics of how you do stuff. So it was that how to work in teams, how to build relationships, how to project manage, how to really kind of make sure you've got the numbers right and things. So budget management. And I think always that was great. And one of my clients in the end, which was Coca-Cola, asked me then to shift into and come and work for them.
Hmm.
We did loads of great stuff. And that then took me into what I call my corporate chapter of my career, which was kind of
Right.
7 years, but started off kind of in the early phases of doing lots of different elements within brand, but learning the ropes of corporate life. And that was a lot more about kind of working across different markets, so having exposure to different countries. I think really kind of building scale, size, and dealing with politics. I think internal politics was my one that I probably learnt in that early phase.
Right. Right.
um, and did lots of great and award-winning kind of campaigns, but always with a different view on it, very innovative. So outside of the mold, I was always slightly outside. So that's when in 2010 they asked me to join the London Olympic, and that kind of started to really ramp up my progress through sport, which was running what they call the torch relay, which is
Right.
I went from being a marketeer to having to organize 70 days, 66 live music events, a team of 70, media interviews, things like that. It suddenly changed my mindset to being so much bigger picture. And that was when I started to know how we could impact people's lives in a positive way. So it was all about Future Flames, which was all about supporting young people in their lives of what they had achieved. So doing good. So what had young people done that were good in the UK, and we wanted them to run with a flame.
Right.
And I think that's when I started to really realize where you can do corporate, but you can do good. I think there's a lot of stories where people think, no, corporate can't do that kind of thing. And I think I'd managed to connect those two together, but also driving commercial results. So it was where I think I really started to join the three elements of kind of how can you make a difference, but it doesn't have to be at a cost, which I think was when you go back to the CSR years and things like that, it was sometimes a tick box exercise. But actually, we wanted to evolve this into actually something more meaningful and impactful. Then they sent me off to Brazil. So I did 4.5 years in Brazil working on the 2016 Olympic, where I probably had my biggest cultural learning and understanding. And this is where you go into a country that's there that has hugely different poverty kind of levels and how you need to adapt to really be successful in that culture. And that's quite that was quite an eye opener for me. But it was also about how do you start to really understand what you can make a difference in the right places. And that's not just about selling fizzy drink. That can be about
Right.
getting access to things, investing in building infrastructures and things that are going to benefit a next generation. And again, when you get, and this is what I love about sport, because sport, the analogy is always like a ball doesn't care what gender you are, what background you come, a bull just wants to get hit or kicked. So it's the
Yes.
most inclusive and pure kind of thing in the world because it has no bias. It's just a ball. And I think that's where I love about sport. So that was a big learning for me. And I spent a long time trying to understand the culture. And then they moved me to Japan where I did worked and ended up leading the 2020 games through the pandemic. So I ended up leading the team of 2,500 people doing testing every day and things like that. But again, a very different culture. But for me, it was also, and this is where I managed to restructure the way that Coke did an Olympic that was more inclusive, that included more of the brands, which had more impact into ESG and could actually move the dial on things like diversity, equity, and inclusion by taking a leadership position and demonstrating that. So I think all the way through this, I was always building up to what my purpose was and how I wanted to turn up. And it was interesting because in Japan, when the games got postponed, and I had a team there who was like, what are we going to do?
Right.
And I went back and I went with each individual person going, what's your why? Why are you here? Why are you here working on the Olympic? Because I needed to motivate them in a way that gave them a purpose to carry on when we weren't sure what was going to happen. And demonstrating that for them to do everything they were doing, it was important that they understood their role within them. And I think that's for me when I started going. We had an amazing. It was Coke's most successful Olympics on record. Yes, commercially one of the successful. Marketing engagement was great, but our ESG, we increased awareness of diversity, equity, inclusion in Japan by about 15%. So we'd managed to do things in the right way that I felt was impactful. So
Right.
yeah.
So keep finish your thought before I ask a question.
And that then took me probably through then when I decided to leave Coke, come back to the UK and focus my time on really on more impactful and purposeful things. So I worked out what my purpose was. I gave myself a framework to work on. So whether that's in the businesses that I invest in, whether that's the sports that I'm now trying to change and evolve and build leadership positions in, is that's been what I've been trying to do. And I think all of that run up got me to that point.
So let's go back to Japan just for a moment. And when you got your team to start articulating their why, give me just for our listeners a flavor of what that process was and what became the immediate outcome for your team.
Yeah, so the process was, and if anyone who understands the Japanese culture, it's very much a collective culture. So
Correct.
individuals are not celebrated. So there's this not celebrated probably a bit hard, but the nail that sticks out gets hammered down in Japan. So, but what I needed to do was collectively, so they'd all suddenly lost their direction. So we had spent 4 years planning an Olympic where there are playbooks, there are rules, this is how we do it, and everyone was prepared. And in March of the year, suddenly someone goes, we're going to postpone this for a year. And suddenly no one knows what they're doing. And at that point, we didn't even know when the games were going to be. So what I tried to do was bring the team down and go, okay, yes, this is unnerving. Yes, this is ambiguous. And yes, it's uncomfortable. So there was a lot of me sharing how I felt. But then it was a case going, okay, let's go down to your individual jobs. And I want you to work out through your teams what your purpose is. You want to make this the best. We want to do the best deliveries for this game because we want to support the athlete. Without us, the athletes don't get to drink. So we need to make sure that we have perfectly cool water at every point. So by making each individual understand their role in the games became collective, they all had their individual purposes and they all laddered up to then their team purpose, which then we also got up to. And again, we built this for the game. So it was about it was with pride and respect, we will maximize Tokyo 2020 to inspire hope for all of us to emerge stronger from the pandemic. And that was their calling. So it was a long process that took about 3 or 4 months of really going back and getting them to go through the cards and find out what their skills were, what they brought to the table, and then galvanizing that to really drive them forward. And that was probably the bit for me where it was even sitting because I had to then demonstrate my purpose as well.
This is so fascinating because the exercise that you have just explained is exactly what I do in my work.
Yeah.
Is that we get people to figure out their individual purpose, the collective purpose, and then find connections that will actually get them to move that needle. And that reinvigorates the whole team
Yeah.
because now people are not searching for those connections and then missing the mark because they're imagining this connection versus what might actually be the real connection. And then just by getting them to articulate, that's so fascinating. Let's talk a little bit about what you're doing now, right? You touched on it, but share a little bit more in terms of how your work is unfolding.
So when I came back in 2022, obviously 16 years working for a great company, great resources and everything, I came back and I thought, you know what, I want to do stuff that is a little bit more impactful. So I had to give myself a structure around it. So the structure was simple. And because I'm a marketeer, I apologize, it was four P's. So there was four things, which was purpose. So it had to have a positive impact into things that were broader than just me or this. There had to be more than just the business, for example. It had to have more to it. So it had to have environmental impact, social impact, things like that. Be something that drove. The other one is then people. So working with people, and I have my personal purpose is all about to inspire, support, and enable people to be the best that they can be. So people is really important to me because I'm a
Yeah.
natural people person. The other one was performance. So whatever I wanted to do, it had to improve performance. So I always believed in the 1% improvement concept. So the day
Yeah.
when it was 1%. So if I learn 1% more and my team can learn 1% more, collectively, it's going to be better. Rather than trying to kind of eat the whole elephant, it's 1%, 1%. So part of that was all about performance. So everything that I was doing needed to do that. And then the last one was about partnership. And partnerships are important because I do believe that the future is going to be so much more about collaborative partnerships that are based on values, shared values, than they will be more about commercial contracts to a point. So I started that and I thought, well, that gives me a framework. And then I started going out. So I started doing some angel investing in some kind of purposeful businesses. I've got three businesses that I'm an angel investor from, one in the US, two in the UK, but they're trying to change things. So one's the sustainable oat milk, which is we take the water out, it's a syrup, and you add water at home. So it's better for the planet, it's better for you, and
Mm.
cheaper. So it's very simple but effective ways to do stuff. And then more recently is where I've started a sports investment program. So what we're trying to do at the moment is raise to buy a women's independent team here in the UK from lower division and change the model. One of the challenges with sport is it's a legacy model and you can't evolve it easily because of it's so entrenched into the way that it's structured. One of the beauties I feel or the opportunities with women's sport is you can rewrite the model in the way that you look at it. And that's what we're doing at the moment, whether that's sport, we're building it in the ecosystem. So it's sport, entertainment, technology, because it's all interconnected. And then you bleed that down into grassroots. So back to the whole analogy is sport is the thing that teaches you to win, to lose, to try hard. It's good for your health. It's all these kind of things. But we seem to make it very difficult. We've just
Yes.
we've made it very expensive and very difficult and not so much fun. So
Right. Right.
what we want to do is put that back into this is like this is what the youngsters, this is what the most important thing you can ever do is those kind of things. So we want to do that in a way that is right and you're paying people the right money and you're doing it in the right way. Now, ask me in a few years' time and see if whether I'm successful, but so far I think it's in the right direction.
And this is women's soccer
Yes.
or any
Yeah.
sports women's soccer?
So at the moment, we're going to focus on just with women's soccer team. So we want to take a women's soccer team and take them up the leagues and build the academies and all the pieces in. And we want to build a different revenue stream. But then we want to do other sports that are more inclusive, that
Right.
are more accessible, and are more sustainable, both financially but also environmentally as well. So can we put all this together? And I know it's a big ask, but you know what? It's one of those things where I think it's time that these things need to change.
Yeah.
We need
No,
to,
I think this is just fantastic. I mean, this is great. And again, for our listeners to just reiterate the four P's. I just think that it is actually not just for marketing and for business, but it is actually also the way we show up as individuals, right? That purpose becomes your North Star. And at the end of the day, it's all about people
Yeah.
because of we invest in people, which is to actually enhance the performance. And that performance is really how they are showing up to be part of this planet. And then what it really does is that the only way you're going to be able to do that is to build partnerships because we don't live on our own. We live in a community. And at the end of the day, what happens is that the difference comes to the planet. So if I may venture to add a fifth P to your four
Yeah.
P's is planet. And that eventually it all boils down to this pale blue dot that is suspended in a sunbeam, which is why we exist. So I think what you're talking about is so critical. And I'm so delighted that we've actually got the chance to talk about that. So when you kind of look at this journey that you're on and you're trying to manifest that in terms of how companies show up with your oatmeal investment or how sports show up with this new approach to actually thinking about how teams play and participate and how do we overcome legacy structures. This is just so fascinating. Thank you very much. You did talk about the importance of purpose, but as we come to our close, I would love for you to share a little bit more about why purpose is so important to you and then end with your one golden nugget, a piece of wisdom that you want to share with our listeners.
So for me, there's the reason for purpose is it has a greater impact than just yourself. It's not siloed. A purpose is not self siloed or self. For me, it has to have a broader impact that leaves a legacy afterward. So that's why I feel that purpose has so much more interconnected to it, that it's
Right.
not just one single thing. That's why it's important to me. That's that one. And my nugget, I'm just thinking about this and trying to work it out. And you know what? I've always thought, and it's a lot of, I speak to a lot of people and a lot of kids these days about like, how do we do ahead? And there's a lot of fear. You mentioned this, like technology and everything else like this, and how does it work? And there's a lot of fear in the world about that. And I say to my nieces or my nephews or my, or students and stuff is like this, if you do three things in life, you'll generally be okay. And the first one is turn up on time or actually turn up early. That's free. It doesn't require brains. It doesn't require anything. The number two is do your best, work as hard as you can, but it's your best. It doesn't have to
Yeah.
be the best, it's your best. And that's free as well. You don't need brains, you don't need brawn, just do the best of your ability. And the last one is just be a decent person. You know what? It's not difficult. It's easy to be a horrible person and just be a decent person. If you stick with those three things in life, you should generally be okay.
I completely agree with you. I think these are such valuable insights. I completely agree with you. Be on time. I am a stickler for being on time and it's free.
Yeah.
It's it's in your control. Sometimes it may not be, but generally it is in your control.
Yeah.
Second is how you show up. Just show up
Yeah.
and be effective in the way you show up. It's not even working hard because hard and not hard is can be subjective, but just show up.
Yeah.
If you show up in your full self and be fully present, you will see the change.
Yeah.
So I think that it is absolutely the right thing that these are and then be and if you show up and if you show up not just for yourself but for the community at large, then you will be a decent person.
Yeah.
Right.
Exactly.
So I think these are just such wonderful words of wisdom. It's been so much fun talking to you. Thank you so very much for being part of this podcast. I've had so much fun and joy, and I'm looking at sports in a very different light. And I will rethink about my, engagement with Coca-Cola because there is a thing that you actually said this, right? That water, that Coke, yes, it produces fizzy drinks, but at the Olympics, it is actually serving water.
Yeah.
And all the athletes need that for their sustenance. So it just stuck in my head when you talked about, your why. This is water, getting water to people. With that, thank you all very much for being part of this podcast. Again, purpose is that renewable sense of energy that continues to drive humanity forward. Follow the five P's. You can't go wrong. And again, show up on time, show up, and show up not just for yourself, but for the community. And I think we will be all good. James, it's been wonderful having you.
Thank you so much.